I checked the DSV Horizon's controls for the third time as the submersible was lowered from the research vessel. The familiar weight of responsibility settled over me as I ran through the pre-dive checklist. Depth gauge calibrated, navigation systems online, life support functioning at 100%, external lights operational. Every detail mattered when you were about to plunge thousands of meters below the surface. The steel cable above us creaked as we dangled precariously between ship and sea. Outside the viewport, the Pacific waves slapped against the reinforced hull, sending tiny vibrations through the deck beneath my feet. Despite 15 years as a Navy sub-pilot, I still felt the familiar tension knot between my shoulders. Pre-mission jitters never quite go away, no matter how many dives you log. Oxygen recycling systems check complete. All green, Izzy Olsen announced from her station to my right. As our marine biologist, Izzy looked more excited than nervous. Her auburn ponytail swung as she swiveled in her seat, checking readings on multiple displays. Communications array online. Data storage systems ready, Braden Jimenez added, his fingers dancing across his control panel. At 29, Braden was the youngest of our crew, but his technical expertise was unmatched. All systems are good to go, Jeff. Our three-person team filled the cramped space of the Horizon's cockpit. Every surface was covered with instruments, screens, or control panels, leaving barely enough room to stretch an arm without bumping into someone. The submersible might be state-of-the-art, but comfort wasn't a design priority. I adjusted my headset and opened the radio channel to the ship above. Horizon to base, pre-dive checks complete, requesting clearance for descent. Alexis Ellis's crisp voice came through immediately. Base to Horizon, weather conditions holding steady. Surface current at 2 knots. You are cleared for descent, Jeff. Standard protocols in effect. Copy that, I replied, initiating the final release sequence. Beginning descent in 30 seconds. The mission brief seemed straightforward enough. The research team had lost contact with an expensive mapping drone somewhere in the Atacama Trench at approximately 8,000 meters. Our job was to locate and retrieve it. A deep dive certainly, but nothing the Horizon couldn't handle. With a slight lurch, the cables released, and we were free. I engaged the descent thrusters, and the bright morning light above began to fade as we sank into the Pacific. 500 meters and descending, I announced, keeping my eyes on the instruments. The water pressure around us increased steadily as darkness enveloped the submersible. At 1,000 meters, I switched on the external lights, cutting bright cones through the inky black water. Look at that, Izzy pointed excitedly as a cluster of bioluminescent fish darted through our light beams, their bodies pulsing with an otherworldly blue glow. Stomias boa, deep-sea dragonfish, beautiful specimens. I nodded politely but kept my attention on our descent rate and trajectory. While Izzy marveled at the marine life, Braden monitored our communication systems, making minor adjustments as we descended deeper. The pressure hull creaked occasionally, a normal sound, but one that never failed to remind me of exactly how much water was pressing in from all sides. As we passed 2,000 meters, my mind drifted briefly to Angela. My daughter would turn 13 next Saturday, becoming a teenager, a milestone I couldn't miss. The thought of her waiting at home, counting down the days until I returned, made me adjust our descent slightly, optimizing for time without compromising safety. Thinking about Angela? Izzy asked, noticing my slight smile. Her birthday's this weekend, I replied, eyes still fixed on the controls. Promised her I'd be back in time. We'll get you there, Braden assured me, looking up briefly from his station. This retrieval should be routine. I nodded, grateful for their understanding. Angela had been through enough disappointments since her mother and I separated 3 years ago. Weekend visits became my anchor, a dependable constant in both our lives. I always kept my promises to Angela. Always. The pressure gauge climbed as I steered the horizon deeper into the Atacama Trench. Our steel hull creaked under the weight of the ocean above. 8,000 meters felt like another world, a dark, cold place few humans had ever seen. 7,000 meters, I announced, keeping my voice steady despite the tension building in my shoulders. Ballast tanks adjusted for the pressure gradient. Izzy, Dr. Winters, nodded beside me, her eyes fixed on the biological sensors. Oxygen levels holding steady, life support functioning at 97% capacity. That's within acceptable parameters, I said, more to myself than to her. The cabin was quieter as we descended, each of us focused on our tasks. The initial excitement had faded into the reality of being in a hostile environment. Every creak of the hull reminded us that millions of tons of water pressed against our vessel. Hours passed. The monotony of descent was broken only by routine status checks and occasional sightings of deep-sea creatures illuminated by our external lights. 4 hours into our journey, the depth gauge approached our target. "We're nearing the ocean floor," I said, reducing our descent speed. "Engaging forward thrusters at 10%. Braden's fingers flew across his control panel. "I've got something." Faint signal matching the drone's beacon. Bearing 147, approximately 800 meters from our position. "Good work," I said, carefully adjusting our trajectory. Activating bottom scanning sonar. The sonar display showed the trench floor, a silty plain with rock formations and hydrothermal vents. Navigating through the murky waters required focus. One wrong move could stir up sediment and block visibility. "Approaching signal source," I said, easing the submersible forward. "Izzy, can you get visual confirmation?" She leaned toward the external camera controls, adjusting the angle of our searchlights. "Visibility poor, but improving. There's a lot of silt down here." I kept us moving slowly, barely above the seafloor, following Braden's directions as he tracked the beacon. After 20 minutes of careful maneuvering, a shape emerged from the gloom. "There," Izzy said, pointing to the main viewport. "Target acquired." The mapping drone lay buried in the ocean floor sediment, its torpedo-shaped body tilted. Despite the depth, it was largely intact. "Positioning for retrieval," I said, bringing the horizon to a complete stop about 10 meters from the drone. "Braden, confirm beacon signal strength." "Signal strong and stable," he replied, his voice carrying the relief we all felt at finding our target. I activated the external floodlights, illuminating the scene more clearly. The drone's titanium casing gleamed dully in the artificial light, its research insignia still visible despite the layer of silt coating it. Izzy leaned forward suddenly, her brow furrowing. "Jeff, wait. Something's not right with the silt pattern around the drone." I paused, studying the area she indicated. The sediment around the drone formed an unusual depression, with strange furrows radiating outward instead of the natural settling pattern we would expect. "Could be underwater currents," I suggested, though I wasn't convinced. "Maybe," Izzy said, unconvinced. "But it looks almost like something dragged it there." We had a mission to complete. "I'm activating the manipulator arm," I said, flipping the switches to power up the hydraulic system. Standard retrieval procedure. The robotic arm extended from the horizon's underside, its pincers opening to grasp the drone. I guided it with precision, using the joystick controller to maneuver through the water. As the arm neared the drone, something caught my eye, a shadow moving at the edge of our floodlight's reach. I hesitated, my hand freezing on the controls. "Did you see that?" I asked. Before either could answer, a tremor ran through the ocean floor. The silt clouded upward in swirling patterns, reducing visibility. Braden frowned at his monitor, his face bathed in the blue glow of the screen. "I'm picking up something large moving toward our position. Really large." "How large?" I asked, already reaching for the thruster controls. "Mass calculation suggests..." His voice faltered. "That can't be right." The tremors intensified. I immediately retracted the manipulator arm, preparing to move away from whatever was approaching. "Jeff!" Izzy's voice went up an octave as she pointed past me toward the viewport. From behind a rock formation to our right, a massive shape burst through the silk cloud. I struggled to process what I was seeing. A creature with a crocodilian head the size of a small car, a body at least 15 meters long, and 4 powerful limbs propelling it through the water. "What the hell is that?" I gasped, instinctively pulling back on the controls. Izzy's training took over despite her shock. "Impossible. That looks like a Kronosaurus, a pliosaur from the early Cretaceous period. They've been extinct for 120 million years." The creature turned, fixing us with eyes that seemed to glow with predatory intelligence. Its mouth opened, revealing rows of conical teeth longer than my forearm. "It's coming right at us," Braden warned, his voice tight with fear. I watched in horror as the massive prehistoric nightmare propelled itself toward the horizon with shocking speed, its paddle-like flippers driving it forward like a living torpedo. In seconds, it would reach us. "Brace for impact!" I shouted, my hands flying across the controls, desperately trying to maneuver us away from the charging behemoth. We had mere seconds to respond before those massive jaws would close around our vulnerable vessel. The impact hit like a freight train, slamming into the port side of the horizon with enough force to throw me against my restraints. The submersible spun wildly, instruments blurring before my eyes as we tumbled through the depths. Red warning lights flashed across every console while alarm klaxons screamed through the cabin. "Stabilizing thrusters!" I yelled, fighting with the control stick as my fingers flew across the emergency systems. The gyroscopic stabilizers whined as they fought against our momentum. "Come on, come on!" The hull groaned around us, a deep metallic protest against pressures that could crush us in an instant if the integrity failed. 8,000 meters below the surface, the ocean wasn't just trying to get in. It was demanding entry with the weight of the entire world above us. "It's coming around again," Izzy shouted from beside me, her eyes fixed on the external camera feed. Before I could respond, a second impact rocked the horizon. This time I heard it, the sharp crack of something giving way. My eyes darted to the reinforced viewport, where a spiderweb of fractures had appeared across the transparent alloy. But the real problem came from behind me. "Water breach. Braden Station," I called out, catching sight of the thin jet of seawater spraying into the cabin from a ruptured seam near where Braden sat. The pressure behind that spray could cut through flesh like a laser. I slammed my hand on the emergency sealing protocol, keeping my other hand locked on the controls. "Activating breach containment." Panels slid from the bulkhead as the automated breach system deployed, but the spray had already found its target. I caught the movement in my peripheral vision. Braden jerked violently as the pressurized water struck him directly, his body going rigid then suddenly limp. "Braden's hit." My voice sounded distant to my own ears as I fought to keep the horizon from tumbling into a fatal dive. The controls bucked in my grip, systems overloading as damage reports flooded my main screen. "Izzy, check him." I couldn't look away from the controls. One wrong move at this depth meant death for all of us. I heard Izzy unstrap from her seat, the sound of her movement barely audible over the shrieking alarms. "Jeff." Her voice came soft and stunned. "He's not breathing. His neck appears broken. The impact." She didn't finish the sentence. The weight of command pressed down on me. Braden was dead, 29 years old, and he was gone in seconds. But there was no time to process it. The proximity sensors shrieked a new warning. "It's circling back," I called out, watching the massive shadow on the depth scanner. The creature moved with impossible speed for its size, banking in a tight arc for another attack run. 8 million years of predatory instinct had found us, and it wasn't backing down. I pushed all available power to the emergency thrusters, my hand white-knuckled on the control stick. The horizon lurched forward just as the massive jaws snapped shut where we had been moments before. On the rear camera feed, I caught a glimpse of rows of conical teeth, each the size of my forearm, missing us by mere feet. The sudden thrust sent us careening toward a series of dark formations rising from the trench floor. My depth scanner rendered them as a network of underwater canyons, narrow passages carved by ancient currents. "Izzy, strap yourself in now," I ordered, banking the submersible toward the nearest canyon entrance. "Secure Braden's body the best you can." I heard her scrambling as I focused on the approach. The horizon wasn't built for this kind of maneuvering, especially with damage to the hull, but the size of the Kronosaurus might work against it in the narrow canyons. "What are you doing?" Izzy called as she secured her harness. "Our only chance," I said, pushing the damaged submersible toward the canyon entrance. The canyon walls rose around us, a maze of rock that could be our escape or our end. We need to lose it in there. It's too big to follow us through the narrow passages. I made the call, banking the horizon into the darkness of the canyon, hoping we could lose the prehistoric predator in the underwater labyrinth that stretched before us. Behind us, the massive shadow changed course, pursuing with terrible determination. I fired the damaged thrusters in short bursts, trying to keep the horizon steady as it moved through the narrow underwater passages. The canyon walls closed in, jagged rock faces flashing by our lights. My hands gripped the controls tightly, making small adjustments with each burst to avoid scraping against the stone. "How are we doing on systems?" I asked, not taking my eyes off our path. Dr. Winters tapped frantically at her console, the blue glow illuminating her face in the dimly lit cabin. "Communications are completely down. We can't reach the surface." Her voice was steady despite everything. "And Jeff, the oxygen recycling system has failed." My stomach dropped. "How long?" "About 6 hours of breathable air left." She looked up from her readouts. "Maybe less with the exertion." I nodded, doing mental calculations. 6 hours to navigate back up 8,000 meters with damaged systems and a prehistoric predator hunting us. The math didn't work. "We need to find somewhere to hide. Make repairs if possible," I said. A shadow passed over the external camera feed, and Dr. Winters grabbed my arm. "It's still with us." The Kronosaurus moved through the water above us, its limbs propelling it with terrifying speed. We had been playing this game for hours. Each time I thought we lost it in the narrow passages, it would reappear, as if it knew the canyons better than we did. "I don't understand how it keeps finding us," I muttered, banking the submersible around a tight corner. Dr. Winters studied the creature on our remaining functional camera. "Jeff, I think it's hurting us." "What do you mean?" "Look at its movement patterns." She pulled up a crude map our navigation system had been building. "Each time we try to head toward this eastern passage, it cuts us off. It's deliberately pushing us deeper into the canyon network." I watched the feed, a chill running up my spine that had nothing to do with the failing temperature regulation. The creature wasn't just chasing us, it was directing our course with calculated precision. "That's impossible," I said, though I didn't believe my own words. "It's just an animal." An animal that shouldn't exist, Dr. Winters reminded me. We have no idea what it's capable of. I spotted a wider passage to our right and angled the thrusters to take us in that direction. The canyon opened slightly, giving me hope we might find a way to double back. The shadow disappeared from our cameras. Did we lose it? Dr. Winters asked, peering at the monitors. The impact came without warning, from above, not behind. The creature had anticipated our move and positioned itself to strike down on us from an overhang. The force of the collision sent the horizon slamming into the canyon wall. The already weakened hull groaned in protest as new alarms blared throughout the cabin. "Structural integrity at 30%, Dr. Winters shouted over the noise. I fought with the controls, trying to stabilize our position, when I heard the sickening sound of the viewport cracking further. A spiderweb of new fractures spread across the reinforced glass. Water began to seep through, a fine mist that would soon become a deadly spray. "Emergency patches," I called out, reaching for the sealant kit beneath my station. "We need to." The horizon shuddered as thrusters misfired, throwing us against the opposite wall. The impact knocked Dr. Winters clear out of her seat. She flew across the small cabin and struck her head against a control panel with a sickening thud before crumpling to the floor. "Izzy," I called out, unable to leave my position at the controls as the submersible threatened to spin out of control. "Izzy, can you hear me?" She lay motionless, a thin line of blood trickling from a gash on her forehead. The red droplets floated slightly in the cabin. Our artificial gravity was failing too. Through the cracked viewport, I could see the Kronosaurus circling back, its massive jaws opening and closing as if tasting our fear in the water. I had no time to check on Izzy properly. If I didn't keep moving, none of us would survive. I spotted a gap between two rock formations ahead, barely wide enough for the horizon to pass through. It was a desperate move, but it might buy us precious seconds. Gritting my teeth, I pushed the damaged thrusters to their limit, guiding our vessel toward the narrow opening. The hull scraped against stone as we squeezed through, metal shrieking in protest. Warning lights flashed across every remaining console as systems failed one after another. I glanced at the external camera feed in time to see the Kronosaurus follow us. Its massive body contorted as it forced itself through the gap, its prehistoric muscles flexing with terrible power. Rock crumbled around it, yet it pressed forward, unwilling to let its prey escape. What disturbed me most wasn't the creature's size or its existence. It was the intelligence in its movements. This wasn't mindless pursuit. It anticipated my moves, blocked escape routes, and pushed us deeper into uncharted territory, with purpose. I checked our depth gauge. We were beyond any mapped area. The thought chilled me. This creature wasn't just hunting us. It was driving us somewhere specific, with a calculation that seemed impossible for a simple predator. As I watched it squeeze through the gap behind us, its eyes fixed on our vessel, I realized we weren't dealing with just an animal, but something with a clear purpose. I pushed the damaged horizon through the narrow gap, gripping the controls tightly as the hull scraped against rock. Ahead, the seafloor opened into a vast landscape. A field of hydrothermal vents stretched before us, their black smokers releasing clouds of mineral-rich water into the ocean. The external temperature sensors flashed warnings as we approached, registering extreme heat. "Come on, hold together," I muttered to the groaning submersible as I eased us deeper into the vent field. The horizon's remaining lights cut through the murky water, illuminating the towers of the black smokers. They looked like industrial chimneys from hell, reaching up from the ocean floor. Mineral particles caught in our lights gave the water an otherworldly glow. I carefully adjusted our course to avoid the superheated plumes that billowed upward. One wrong move into that 400-degree water would cook us alive in seconds. A groan from behind me pulled my attention from the controls. Dr. Winters was regaining consciousness, her hand moving to the wound on her head as she pulled herself up. She winced with the effort, blood still floating in small globules around her. With deliberate movements, she grabbed handholds along the cabin wall and pulled herself back to her seat. "We're in a hydrothermal vent field," I told her as she strapped herself in. "How's your head?" "Been better," she said, her voice strained. "Status update? The good news is these vents are giving us some cover. Bad news is our prehistoric friend is still with us." I gestured toward the external camera feed. The Kronosaurus was visible at the edge of our lights, circling the perimeter of the vent field. It moved with predatory patience, keeping its distance from the plumes of superheated water. "Smart," Dr. Winters said, leaning forward to study the monitor. "It knows to avoid the heat." I nodded, watching the creature's calculated movements. It's hunting us like we're injured prey, which, to be fair, we are. With the immediate threat paused, I checked our systems. The manipulator arm responded to commands, and its hydraulics worked. One emergency thruster had power, though it sputtered when used. The ballast system was still operational, a small miracle given everything else that had failed. "What's our oxygen situation?" I asked. Dr. Winters ran her fingers over her console, bringing up the life support readings. 5 hours, maybe less with the damaged recycling system. "Communications?" She shook her head. "Still dead. No contact with the surface." I stared at the external feed again, watching the Kronosaurus circle. It wasn't leaving. It was waiting for us to make a mistake or be forced out of our temporary sanctuary. An idea began taking shape as I studied the unstable rock formations near the largest vent. Years of thermal stress had created a precarious balance, evident in the fissures running through the stone. "See that?" I pointed to the rock formation on Dr. Winters' monitor. "Those formations near the big vent, they're unstable." Dr. Winters leaned closer, analyzing the geological structure. "The thermal stress has created significant fracturing patterns. What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking we might be able to use this death trap to our advantage." I outlined my plan, my finger tracing the path on the screen. "We position ourselves near those rocks, lure our friend in close, and then trigger a collapse. We can use the manipulator arm to strike the weakest point while firing the emergency thruster to get clear." Dr. Winters nodded. "The rock has been through extreme temperature changes, heating from the vent, cooling from the water. That creates microfractures throughout the formation." She looked at me. "You're right. A solid impact at the stress point could trigger a collapse. Enough to bury our friend? Or at least slow it down?" "Maybe," she said. "The thermal stresses make the rock very brittle. It's like hitting glass that's been heated and cooled quickly." I took a deep breath and began maneuvering the horizon toward the largest vent, keeping a careful eye on the temperature readings. The heat gradient intensified as we approached, but I maintained a safe distance from the superheated plume while positioning us near the unstable rock formation. "If this doesn't work," Dr. Winters started. "It has to," I replied, my hand steady on the controls as I brought us into position. The Kronosaurus continued its patient circling, its ancient eyes watching our every move as I prepared to execute my plan. I vented oxygen bubbles into the black water and set our remaining external lights to flash in an erratic pattern. The effect was immediate, bright pulses cutting through the murk, the oxygen creating a trail of shimmering bubbles that danced through the beams. Perfect bait for a predator that had evolved to hunt by detecting disturbances in the water. "Like fishing with dynamite," I muttered, more to myself than to Izzy. From her seat, Dr. Winters tracked the creature's movement on the external camera feed, her fingers tapping rapidly across her console, despite the blood still matted in her hair from the earlier impact. "It's working," she said, voice tight. "The specimen is changing course, coming straight for us." I nodded, keeping my hand steady on the controls. The plan was simple but desperate: lure the Kronosaurus into the unstable rock formation and bring the whole thing down on top of it. The thermal stress from the vent had created enough fracturing patterns that one good hit could trigger a collapse. I just needed to time it perfectly. On the monitor, I watched the massive shape materialize from the darkness. The creature moved with deliberate purpose, its paddle-like limbs propelling its 25-foot body through the water with terrifying efficiency. Each stroke brought it closer, its primitive brain fixated on the sensory disruption we'd created. 10 seconds to intercept," Dr. Winters announced, her voice clinical despite the situation. 8, 7. I positioned my hand over the emergency thruster controls, mentally calculating thrust vectors and timing. Too soon and the creature would adjust its attack. Too late, and those jaws would close around our hull. "Jeff," Dr. Winters said, gripping her armrests until her knuckles whitened. "It's approaching too fast. We need to move now." "Not yet," I replied, watching the distance counter tick down. "We get one shot at this." The Kronosaurus surged forward, accelerating in the final approach. Its massive head came fully into view on the monitor, ancient, alien, with eyes that held a cold intelligence that had no right existing in something so primitive. The creature opened its jaws, revealing rows of conical teeth designed to grip and tear. Each tooth was the length of my forearm, evolved to puncture the armor of ancient cephalopods that had long since vanished from Earth's oceans. Except for us. We were the cephalopods now. "Now!" I shouted, simultaneously firing the emergency thruster at full power and slamming the manipulator arm controls forward. The robotic arm shot out, striking the already fractured rock formation with mechanical force. I felt the impact transfer through the hull as the arm connected, then the horizon lurched upward as the emergency thruster engaged, pushing us rapidly away from the sea floor. Below us, the unstable rocks gave way with a subsonic rumble I could feel through my body more than hear. The Kronosaurus, committed to its attack run and unable to change course in time, plunged directly into the collapsing formation. "It's working!" Dr. Winters called out, leaning forward to track the chaos unfolding beneath us. The sea floor seemed to open up as tons of rock tumbled into the newly formed cavity. The disrupted hydrothermal vent released a massive plume of superheated water, creating a violent upward current filled with debris and scalding fluid. For a moment, I lost sight of the Kronosaurus in the churning cloud. Then the shockwave hit us. The horizon spun violently as the pressure wave caught us broadside. Warning alarms screamed through the cabin. I was thrown against my restraints, the control stick wrenched from my grip. Loose objects became projectiles, smashing against walls and instrumentation. "Hold on," I yelled, fighting to regain control of our vessel. I grabbed the stick with both hands, using short, controlled bursts from our remaining functional thrusters to counter the spin. The hull groaned under the strain. Metal fatigue warnings flashed across my console as the vessel struggled against forces it was never designed to withstand. I managed to stabilize our pitch and roll, but we were still rising too fast, dangerously fast for a vessel in our condition. "Structural integrity at 18%, Dr. Winters called out, reading from her display. "Hull breach imminent in multiple." She never finished. The viewport, already compromised from previous impacts, finally gave way completely. The reinforced glass exploded inward with a sound like a gunshot. Freezing seawater rushed in with such force that it slammed me back against my seat. Automatic systems triggered instantly. Emergency bulkheads slammed down with hydraulic finality, sealing off the compromised forward section. The compartmentalization saved us from immediate death, but cut our usable cabin space by half. In the chaos, I could barely see through the water that had entered before the bulkheads deployed. The cabin lights flickered, casting strange shadows as emergency power rerouted to critical systems. Alarms continued their urgent wail as I tried to assess our situation. Water sloshed around my ankles, frigid and heavy. The temperature in the cabin plummeted as the environmental systems struggled to compensate. I wiped moisture from the main console, trying to read our depth and ascent rate. "Dr. Winters?" I called out, blinking water from my eyes. "Izzy? Status report." I punched the emergency ascent protocol and slammed my palm against the ballast release. The damaged horizon shuddered as the weights dropped away, and immediately we lurched upward in a sickening, uncontrolled rise. My stomach seemed to stay behind as the vessel shot toward the surface. Through the spider-webbed viewport, the only one still intact, I caught a final glimpse of the hydrothermal vent field below us. The water was cloudy with debris from the collapse, but something moved within it. A massive shape, darker than the surrounding murk, twisted through the clouds of silt. The Kronosaurus. Even with tons of rock crashing down on it, the prehistoric monster was still alive, pushing through the debris with powerful strokes of its fins. I saw it turn, as if looking up at our retreating vessel, and for a split second, I swore those ancient eyes locked onto mine. "It survived," I muttered, but no one heard me. A terrible groan of metal pulled my attention back inside the cabin. The rapid change in pressure was already punishing our damaged hull. Water sloshed around my ankles, cold and salty, rising slowly but steadily. "Dr. Winters," I called, looking over at Izzy. "We need to manage the ascent rate or—" She didn't answer. Her head had rolled to one side, eyes closed, the blood from her earlier wound still matted in her hair. The violent pressure changes inside the cabin had caused her to lose consciousness again. Damn it. I reached across but couldn't touch her while keeping both hands on the controls. "Izzy." Nothing. I was on my own. The horizon was never designed for emergency ascent from such depths. Every moment brought new warnings as systems failed one after another. The overhead panels shot sparks, and the acrid smell of burning electronics filled the cabin. When the oxygen recycler gave out completely, the pressure gauge began climbing in a way that made my blood run cold. I knew what would happen if I did nothing. At our current ascent rate, with oxygen building up and nowhere to vent, the horizon would become a bomb. My hands flew across the manual override, opening the emergency oxygen vents in controlled bursts. Each time I opened a valve, precious breathing air escaped, but it kept the interior pressure from building to explosive levels. Pain lanced through my head as my inner ears struggled to adjust. I felt a warm trickle down my neck and wiped at it absently. My fingers came away smeared with blood. The pressure changes were too rapid, too extreme for my body to handle. My eardrums had ruptured. More alarms blared, somehow sounding distant through my damaged hearing. The hull creaked with an awful, low moan that vibrated through the metal floor and up into my bones. Water now reached my shins, but I couldn't worry about that, not with the more immediate threat of a pressure-induced explosion. My vision swam, edges darkening as my body reacted to the punishing conditions. I blinked hard, forcing myself to focus on the control panel. We couldn't slow down. The horizon was breaking apart around us, but I needed to stay conscious. "Just a little longer," I said to myself, voice sounding strange in my damaged ears. "Keep it together." I glanced over at Dr. Winters again. She hadn't moved, strapped securely in her seat, head still tilted at that unnatural angle. The only sign she was alive was the slight rise and fall of her chest. I wished I could check her pulse, assess her condition. but leaving the controls even for a second wasn't an option. The depth gauge drew my attention. Red digital numbers ticked down rapidly as we shot upward. 5,900 meters. 5,800. I remembered my Navy training, the careful warnings about pressure changes and the human body. Ascending this fast from such extreme depths practically guaranteed decompression sickness. The bends. Gas bubbles forming in the bloodstream, in the joints, in the brain. Potentially fatal. But what choice did I have? We passed the 5,000-meter mark. The water around my legs felt warmer, or maybe my extremities were going numb from the cold. My fingers tingled as I manipulated the controls, feeling strangely detached from my own body. 4,700 meters, I announced to no one who could hear me. The habit of reporting depths was ingrained after years of dives. More sparks showered from the ceiling. I ducked, raising an arm to protect my face, but kept my other hand firmly on the controls. The electrical fire suppression system activated, spraying foam across the back of the cabin. At least something still worked. 4,000 meters. We'd climbed 4 kilometers from the ocean floor, but we still had a long way to go. My lungs burned with each breath, the air growing stale despite my careful venting. The gauge showed our oxygen levels dropping steadily. We had maybe an hour of breathable air left, less if the rate of water ingress increased. I wiped more blood from my ear, wincing at the sharp pain. The pressure changes were wreaking havoc on my body. My joints ached, my vision kept blurring, and I felt a stabbing pain behind my eyes that intensified with each meter we climbed. Navy dive tables ran through my head. How fast could a human safely ascend? How long should decompression stops last? The numbers seemed like a cruel joke now. There was no safe ascent from 8,000 meters in a vessel that was breaking apart. If the Horizon survived the ascent, we'd need immediate medical treatment for decompression sickness. If it didn't, well, drowning might be quicker than dying from the bends. 3,500 meters, I said, still talking to fill the silence. My voice sounded muffled, distant. Just keep going, old girl. Just keep going. The hull groaned again, a low, tortured sound that seemed to come from everywhere at once. More warning lights flashed across my console. Structural integrity critical, hull breach imminent, life support failing. I tried to remember the ocean above us. The research vessel would be scanning for our emergency beacon. If they realized we were ascending, they might send down rescue submersibles to intercept. But would they make it in time? The image of my daughter Angela flashed through my mind. Her birthday this weekend. I'd promised to be there. I'd promised Ellen I wouldn't miss another one. Not like this, I muttered, fighting against the encroaching darkness at the edges of my vision. Not going to die down here. The depth gauge continued its countdown. 3,200 meters. 3,100. Each breath felt harder than the last. The cabin air grew thick, a combination of failing life support and the rising water that now covered my knees. I shivered, my body temperature dropping despite the sweat beading on my forehead. Dr. Winters remained unconscious, oblivious to our desperate situation. Maybe that was a blessing. She wasn't feeling the pain of rapid ascent, wasn't aware of the terrible gamble we were taking. Her face looked strangely peaceful, despite the blood in her hair and the harsh emergency lights casting red shadows across her features. Almost halfway, I told her, even though she couldn't hear me. We're going to make it. I didn't know if I believed that. The horizon shuddered around me like a living thing in pain. The metal skin of the submersible was never meant to change pressures this quickly. Every bolt, every weld, every seal was being tested beyond its limits, and so was I. My body felt wrong, my thoughts growing sluggish. I recognized the symptoms: nitrogen narcosis maybe, or the beginning stages of oxygen deprivation. I forced myself to concentrate, to keep checking gauges and adjusting controls even as my fingertips went numb. We passed through the 3,000-meter mark. Still so far to go, but I couldn't slow our ascent now. The horizon was dying around us. Our only hope was to reach the surface before the hull gave out completely. I took a breath that felt like sucking air through a straw and watched the numbers continue to tick down. 2,900 meters. 2,800. Still rising at a dangerous speed toward the surface, knowing that survival meant trading one type of death for another. The horizon broke the surface with a violent lurch that nearly threw me from my seat. Daylight flooded through the cracked viewport, startlingly bright after hours in darkness. The emergency locator beacons activated with high-pitched wails, their lights flashing frantically across the half-flooded control console. We'd made it. Somehow we'd actually made it back to the surface. Water sloshed around my waist now, ice cold and rising. Each breath came ragged and painful, my lungs burning from the thin, stale air. The taste of copper filled my mouth. Blood, I realized dimly. My own blood. "Izzy," I croaked, turning toward her still form. Dr. Winters remained strapped in her seat, unconscious, her face pale beneath the matted blood in her hair. The gentle rise and fall of her chest was the only sign she was alive. I tried to reach the radio, but my limbs felt heavy. Dizziness swirled around me as I struggled to stay awake. 4 hours of climbing, 4 hours of battling pressure changes, system failures, and my own worsening condition had drained me completely. The water climbed steadily higher, reaching my chest. The control panels sparked and hissed as more systems shorted out. I knew I should unstrap Izzy, move her to higher ground, but my fingers fumbled uselessly with the buckle. My thoughts scattered like fish darting away from a predator. Angela's face floated in my mind. Her birthday. Saturday. I'd promised. Time stretched and compressed. I might have passed out briefly. The next thing I knew, the water had reached my shoulders. I'd managed to unbuckle myself but remained slumped in the pilot's seat, watching bubbles rise from the submerged equipment. The horizon was dying around us, its sturdy frame finally surrendering after everything it had endured. A distant mechanical sound cut through the hiss of failing electronics and the splash of water. Engines, large ones. The sound grew louder, more distinct. My sluggish brain eventually recognized it, the approach of rescue boats. "Here," I tried to call, but it came out as a whisper. I raised a heavy arm toward the viewport, though no one could see the gesture. The engine noise stopped. Voices called out, muffled but urgent. Something bumped against the horizon's hull. Then came the metallic sounds of tools on the emergency hatch. I looked at Izzy one more time, her face now barely above the rising water. "They're here," I told her, though she couldn't hear me. "We made it." The rescue hatch squealed as someone forced it open from outside. Bright light and fresh air rushed in along with a man's voice, clear and commanding. "We've got survivors. I need medical in here now." The voice belonged to Nolan Brewer, the Oceanic Pioneer's chief rescue officer. His broad frame blocked the light momentarily as he dropped into the flooded cabin. "Jeff, Dr. Winters." His eyes found me first, then darted to Izzy. "2 survivors, 1 unconscious with head trauma. And," his voice caught as his light found the 3rd seat where Braden's body remained secured, his neck at an impossible angle. More rescue personnel followed Nolan into the cramped space. One moved directly to Izzy while Nolan waited toward me. "Can you move?" he asked, his face tight with professional concern. I tried to nod but couldn't be sure if my head actually moved. "We're getting you out. The submersible's going under." His strong hands gripped under my arms. "Stay with me, Jeff." I was lifted through the hatch and passed to a rescue boat. The bright daylight made my eyes water. The Oceanic Pioneer loomed larger as we approached. From my stretcher, I watched another team carefully removing Braden's body from the horizon, now half submerged. They covered him with a tarp, movements respectful and solemn. In the boat ahead, medical staff worked frantically over Izzy, calling vital signs to each other, starting an IV. We reached the Oceanic Pioneer, and they hauled us up one by one. Izzy went first, rushed immediately across the deck toward the ship's medical facilities. I came next, still conscious enough to register the faces of the crew. Shocked, curious, solemn. Last came Braden, the tarp now fully covering him. Someone wrapped me in a thermal blanket and laid me on the deck, checking my vitals and shining a light in my eyes. I heard them mention decompression sickness, possible ruptured eardrums, hypothermia, and oxygen deprivation. I pushed their hands away, insisting I could sit. They helped me to a crate near the railing, where I could look out at the ocean. The horizon was gone now, slipped back into the depths that had nearly claimed us all. I stared at the rolling surface of the Pacific, seeing instead the darkness below, and the ancient thing that lived in it. Jeff. A hand on my shoulder made me flinch. Theo McDonald stood beside me, his wire-rimmed glasses catching the sunlight. The expedition's scientific director looked haggard, the lines on his face deeper than I remembered. What happened down there? I opened my mouth, but no words came. How could I explain what we'd seen? The creature that should not exist, the intelligence in its eyes, the way it had hunted us through the canyons. "Braden," I managed, my voice rough. "He didn't. When it hit us, the breach." "Take your time," Theo said, crouching to my level. "But I need to know what you found." The medical team had left us alone momentarily, seeing to more urgent matters. Around us, crew members worked at a respectful distance, stealing glances. "We found the drone," I said finally, "but something else found us. Something impossible." "What was it, a new species?" I almost laughed, but it came out as a cough. "Not new, ancient. A Chronosaurus." Izzy identified it. Theo's face went blank with disbelief. "A pliosaur? They've been extinct for over 100 million years." I know what we saw. The image flashed in my mind again. Massive jaws, ancient eyes, primal hunger. My hands began to shake under the blanket. "How big?" Theo asked, his scientific curiosity overriding his initial skepticism. 15 meters. Maybe more. It attacked us. Deliberately. It knew what it was doing. It herded us through the canyons like it was playing with us. Theo stared at me, then out at the ocean. "You're certain? Could it have been a giant squid? Maybe a previously undocumented whale species?" "It wasn't a whale. It wasn't a squid." My voice rose, drawing glances from nearby crew. "It was hunting us. It killed Braden. It nearly killed all of us." I fell silent, exhaustion washing over me again. What was the point? No one who hadn't seen those ancient eyes could understand. "We retrieved your external camera data," Theo said carefully. "Most of it was corrupted, but we might be able to recover some footage." I nodded, indifferent. Footage wouldn't show what it felt like to be hunted by something that had existed long before us. It wouldn't capture the intelligence in its movements or how it had cornered us. "How's Izzy?" I asked, changing the subject. Theo's expression tightened. "Critical. They're doing what they can, but she needs a proper hospital. We're heading back to Valparaiso at full speed. Should reach port in 18 hours. I nodded again, relief mingling with continued worry. And Braden? We'll take care of him properly once we're ashore. Theo looked away, toward where they had taken his body. His family will be notified. We sat in silence, the weight of what had happened heavy between us. I wanted to explain more to Theo, to help him grasp the terror we faced, but the words wouldn't come. How could I describe the fear of being hunted? The creature's roar as it crashed through the water. The unsettling feeling that it wasn't just following instinct, but had a purpose. You should rest, Theo finally said, standing. The doctor will want to examine you properly. We can talk more later, once you've had time to recover. He left me alone with the blanket and my thoughts. Crew members moved across the deck, securing equipment, radioing updates. The sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in colors I'd thought I might never see again. Later, a medic helped me to a small cabin where I could lie down. As I drifted in and out of consciousness, I learned through fragments of conversation that we were indeed heading to Valparaiso, making the best possible speed. Izzy remained stable but unconscious, receiving the limited care they could provide on board. A proper medical team would meet us at the dock, along with officials who would need statements about what had happened. What had happened? The question circled in my mind as exhaustion pulled me toward sleep. What would I tell them? What could anyone say about a nightmare come to life from the prehistoric depths? As darkness claimed me, one thought remained clear. Somewhere deep in the Atacama Trench, the Kronosaurus still moved through ancient waters, wounded perhaps, but very much alive. I found out 3 days after they pulled us from the water that Dr. Winters had stabilized. The doctors said her vitals were good, but she stayed in a coma. Some brain swelling, they explained. Words like cautiously optimistic and wait and see filled the sterile hospital hallways. The Oceanic Pioneer docked in Valparaiso yesterday afternoon. I'd spent most of those days giving statements, filing reports, and sitting through debriefings that felt endless. Nobody quite believed what we'd seen down there. Theo kept asking me the same questions in different ways, like he was trying to catch me in a lie. But what happened wasn't something I could make up. I stopped at the hospital before my flight home. The taxi dropped me off at the entrance, and I walked through the automatic doors. A nurse directed me to Dr. Winters's room on the 3rd floor. When I stepped inside, the beeping of monitors filled the air. She looked small against the white sheets, her face pale, tubes in her arms, and a bandage wrapped around her head where she'd hit it during our escape. "Hey, Izzy," I said, pulling up a chair next to her bed. No response, just the steady rhythm of machines. I took out her research journal from my bag. I'd spent the last 2 nights in my cabin completing her notes with everything we'd seen down there. The creature's size, its movements, its hunting tactics, the way it seemed to think through problems. I'd sketched what I remembered of its jaw structure and fins, trying to capture details that might be useful to science. Not that I was much of an artist. I placed the journal on her bedside table, next to a vase of flowers someone had brought. I added everything I could remember, I told her. Figured you'd want it all documented when you wake up. The monitors beeped steadily. Outside her window, the hills of Valparaiso rose from the harbor, houses painted in bright colors. I need to catch my flight, I said. Angela's birthday is tomorrow. I sat there a moment longer, watching Izzy breathe. I hadn't known her long before the expedition, but going through something like that, it creates a connection. We were the only two people on Earth who knew what really waited in that trench. "I'll come back," I said quietly. "Once you're awake, we'll figure out what to tell them about what happened down there." I didn't say goodbye. It felt wrong somehow. Instead, I squeezed her hand gently and walked out. The taxi to the airport cut through the busy streets of Valparaiso. I leaned my head against the window, tired in a way sleep couldn't fix. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw it all again. The creature charging at the viewport, the water rushing in, Braden's body jerking before going still. The image of his neck at that impossible angle followed me into my dreams each night. I'd wake up gasping, sheets soaked with sweat, thinking I was drowning again. At the airport, the commotion of travelers swirled around me. I moved through security on autopilot, my mind still 8,000 meters below the surface. The announcement for my flight barely registered. Only when I stepped into the terminal did my heart start beating faster. Angela stood by the gate, bouncing on her toes as she scanned the arriving passengers. Ellen stood behind her, one hand on our daughter's shoulder. When Angela spotted me, her face lit up brighter than all the emergency lights on the horizon. "Dad!" She broke free from her mother and ran straight at me. I dropped my carry-on and knelt down, opening my arms just in time to catch her. She crashed into me with the force of a 12-year-old's full enthusiasm, almost knocking me over. "You made it! You're here!" she yelled into my ear, squeezing me with surprising strength. I held her tight, burying my face in her hair that smelled like strawberry shampoo. Her weight kept me grounded. After days of fear, nothing felt as real. "I missed you so much," she said, pulling back to look at my face. Her eyes widened slightly. I knew I looked terrible. The bruises hadn't faded, and according to the doctors, I'd lost 15 pounds in the 3 days we'd been down there. Ellen approached, her expression a mix of relief and concern. "You look like you've been through hell, Jeff." "Pretty close," I said quietly. She touched my arm briefly, a small gesture that carried weight between us. "We were worried." "I told Mom you'd make it back in time," Angela said proudly, grabbing my hand. "I knew you wouldn't miss my birthday." The drive from the airport felt surreal. Ellen had insisted on picking me up despite our separation, and now she navigated the evening traffic while Angela filled me in on everything I'd missed. School projects, friend drama, plans for her birthday party. All the wonderfully normal things that had seemed so far away when I was trapped at the bottom of the ocean. The familiar streets of our neighborhood passed outside the window. My body still felt wrong, like I was experiencing motion sickness on land. The doctors had warned me about this. My inner ear would take time to readjust after the rapid pressure changes. "So what was it like down there, Dad?" Angela asked, turning in her seat to face me. "Did you see any cool fish?" I caught Ellen's glance in the rearview mirror. Her eyes said what her mouth didn't. "Be careful what you tell her." "It was dark," I began. "We saw some fish that glow. The pressure down there is immense." "Did you find what you were looking for?" I nodded. "We found the mapping drone. It had gotten stuck down there." "Was it scary?" Her eyes were wide with curiosity. "Some of it," I said. "The ocean is powerful. You feel small down there." "But you're a hero," she said with complete conviction. "Mom said you saved Dr. Winters." I looked away, thinking of Braden, the one I couldn't save. We helped each other. Ellen pulled into our driveway, her driveway now. We'd agreed I would stay here for Angela's birthday weekend. My apartment could wait. Can you tell me more about the deep-sea creatures? Angela asked as we carried my bags inside. For my science project? Tomorrow, Ellen said firmly, seeing the exhaustion on my face. Your dad needs to rest. Later, after Angela had gone to bed, I sat on the back porch staring up at the stars. The night air felt good on my skin. Ellen brought me a beer and sat in the chair beside mine. You want to talk about what really happened down there? She asked. I took a long drink. Not really. Jeff, I've known you for 15 years. Something's eating at you. I set the bottle down. We lost someone, a good kid named Brayden. Her face softened. I'm sorry. And the official report, it doesn't tell the whole story. What do you mean? I almost told her. About the creature, its intelligence, the way it hunted us, but the words stuck in my throat. How could I explain something that shouldn't exist? The science teams were already dismissing my account as trauma-induced hallucination or oxygen deprivation. Just that it was worse than they're letting on, I said finally. Ellen didn't push. That was always one of her strengths. That night, lying in the guest bedroom of what used to be my home, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw it, the massive body moving through the water, the ancient eyes tracking our movements, the deliberate way it had herded us into the canyon. It was still down there. I knew it. Wounded from the rocks we dropped on it, but alive. Moving through the darkness of the Atacama Trench, where no light had reached for millions of years. A living fossil, a prehistoric terror that had somehow survived while the rest of its kind vanished from Earth. I turned over, punching the pillow. The rational part of me, the part trained through years of scientific expeditions, kept insisting it was impossible. But the part of me that had looked into those eyes knew better. I'd survived to tell what happened. The question that kept me awake was, who would be next? How many others might drift down into its hunting grounds, unprepared for what waited in the darkness? Salvage crews, research teams, geological surveys. The Atacama Trench was becoming a hotspot for deep-sea exploration. And none of them knew what was down there. The ceiling fan turned above me. Tomorrow was Angela's birthday. I'd wrap her presents, help Ellen with the cake, and watch our daughter blow out 13 candles. I'd try to focus and push away the memories, but I couldn't shake the knowledge that 8,000 meters below, in the dark, something ancient waited. Something that had tasted human technology and perhaps blood. Something that had learned we were prey